In two previous videos, we've looked at Mishnah Kiddushin and Tosefta Kiddushin, and today we're looking at Mishnah Yevamot 413. Now, the reason that we've been looking at these passages is because we're trying to understand Jewish identity as was understood by the rabbis of the Mishnaic period, because they never really address it directly. It's always indirectly or by inference when they look at specific classifications of individuals or the penalties that a particular union, sexual union might have. And so these passages inform us what penalties were given for specific types of unions and how that affects the idea of who was a Jew. So this begins by saying, Ezehu mamzer, who was a mamzer, kol she'er basar shehu belo yavo. So the word kol is all. She'er is kinship or relationships. Basar, of course, is flesh. Shehu belo yavo. So the individual that it is not permitted to him to approach. So the Torah in the book of Leviticus states that there are relationships within a family that are prohibited. You cannot marry certain people within a certain sphere of your family. You cannot uncover their nakedness. So the mamzer, in this particular case, according to this view, is the product of a union that is prohibited for an individual to come near to. Belo yavo. Divrei Rabbi Akiva, these are the words of Rabbi Akiva. Shimon hatimni omer, Simon the Temani. In this particular case, I believe Teman is referring to Teman in the territory of Edom and not Yemen, as is often understood. Kol shechayavim alav karet be'adol shamayim. So Rabbi or Simon says, if you will, that an individual is a mamzer if he belongs to the category, if you will, of a union for whom it is obligated to render karet, spiritual excision, by the hands of heaven, bidei hashamayim or bidei shamayim. V'chalacha chid barav. The halacha, the law, is in accordance with his words. Rabbi Yehoshua Omer, Rabbi Yehoshua says, Kol shechayavim alav mitat beit din. So in the case of Rabbi Yehoshua, he believes that the category that produces a mamzer is of those upon whom it is obligated to render a death penalty through the beit din, through the rabbinic court, to the court of law, or the court of judgment. Rabbi Shimon ben Azai. Rabbi Simon ben Azai said, Matzati Megillat Yuchasin. I found a scroll. Yuchasin is genealogy. So I found a scroll of genealogy, Berushalayim, in Jerusalem, Bechatuv Ba, and it was written therein, Ish Peloni Mamzer Mi Eshet Ish. There was a man, Peloni so-and-so, was a mamzer. Mi Eshet Ish. And he was, the implication I think is here that he was the product of a woman who was married to a man, of course, but there was an adulterous relationship. Lekayem divrei Rabbi Yehoshua. This establishes or confirms the words of Rabbi Yehoshua. Now the Mishnah switches gears, if you will, and continues Ishto Shemata Mutar Be'achota. So if you have an individual who's married and his wife dies, mutar be'achota, his sister is now, or her sister, I should say, is now permitted to him, because the Torah mandates that a man cannot marry two sisters at the same time, or within the lifetime of the original wife. Gerusha ve'meta. Well, what about if you have a case where the man divorces his wife and she dies? Mutar be'achota. Now she's permitted to him, because if she's not permitted to him, then of course the implication is that the union will produce a mamzer. Niset le'acher v'mata. What about if there is another sister-in-law and she dies, mutar be'achota, then another sister is also permitted to him. Yevimto shemeta. What about the case of Yevamah, of levirate marriage, where an individual is married, he dies without leaving his wife children. It is incumbent upon the individual, his brother or the next of kin, to marry that woman, to perform levirate marriage, to carry on the deceased name, and then this woman dies. Well, mutar be'achota. If the man desires to do so, he may marry her sister because she is now permitted to him. Chalatz la ve'meta mutar be'achota. Well, what about if he performed chalitza? He followed the procedure to be released from the obligation to marry his brother's widow, and she dies. Well, mutar be'achota. He's permitted to take her sister as his wife. And the whole issue here is to establish what offspring are actually classified as a mamzer, or the issue of mamzrut. That is to say that if you have a Jewish woman and she has relations with a non-Jewish man, even though that is prohibited, the offspring of that union is not a mamzer. It's a Jew. Now the fact that the father is not Jewish will have other implications, but halachically, according to Jewish law, there is no issue as far as the Jewish status of the child, and the child is not a bastard. Let's say that you have a case in which you have a non-Jewish mother and she has relations with a Jewish father. The child of that union is not a mamzer. They're not a bastard. They're simply not a Jew. And so in that sense, the stigma of mamzrut does not impact the child. Now that relationship again is forbidden, but if it were to happen, the classification of the child is that of a non-Jew.